Today we run up against the Enel matchup with a relatively new player. This matchup can work really well if we can abate some of the aggro, but also we can take advantage of some lack of player knowledge here. Let's go to the games. Off the bat, my opponent's on the play. They have no turn one play, and I'm going to set out my life here and then draw, go to 2 Dawn, and really this is just going to be, getting a little proactive, filtering with some Kayas, getting rid of an Impel down and a Mr. 1, and then pass the turn. So at some point, I'm just going to have to slow down a little bit here. I did not realize at this point in the game that my opponent's relatively new to the game, so I definitely want to slow down, just make sure I'm explaining things to them. I don't want to take advantage of their lack of knowledge here. So I kind of let them know, I'm like, hey, you got to tap out that last Dawn as well. It is costing 3. And then at that point, they are looking to kind of swing in with their leader and get some combat in from there. So they're going to kind of point and do that. I'm going to counter out with the Mr. 1, and they are going to pass the turn from there. And I was thinking at first, I was just joking around. I'm like, oh my God, Holly costing 2? That's new to me. I'm like, that'd be a nightmare for me. But I was like, no worries, no worries. I'm going to untap to 4, play the peel off, draw 2 cards, and then at that point my hand's kind of bad here, so I'm gonna Kaya. I'm gonna draw 2 cards and then pitch the Impel down there, and I'm thinking, okay, I do kind of want to keep that 2k in there just to counter out, because their goal is probably just to kind of play as wide a board as possible. I'm thinking like an Ohm and a Holly is probably gonna be in my future, so I'm like, okay, they're not gonna attack with too much Dawn. I can then counter out with the kind of Apis there, as well as a 1k counter. So my hand's actually not that bad. And then once we can get some kind of card draw set up, we should be fine. We have the Zeff to bounce out a Holly next turn, and then we can hold up Gavel. So we're honestly not in a terrible spot here. And this is how we're just going to manage things. They find themselves an Ohm into Holly. So they play the Ohm. They manage to find it out of the top 5. And then they're going to do some combat here. So they have 1 Dawn left to kind of work with. And I was just kind of like, no, yeah, you can swing with one of the Hollies and one of the Enels. So they're going to swing 6k there. I'm going to counter out with the 2k. And then they're going to swing with the 5k leader. And then I'm going to counter that out as well. Not now. I'm going to take that hit. So really there, I could have countered out, but you have to understand the cards that I have in my hand, I really want to use to interact with. I don't want to let go of the Zeff. I can take the hit. And another reason why you want to take the hit there is honestly just to play around the Gidatsu. I don't know what they're playing as a new player. So I'm going to mill 2 cards with the Zeff. I'm going to bounce their Holly, and then I'm going to swing 5k at that. And the reason I did this first was I actually wanted to bait them into removing the Holly. That's the key there. I genuinely wanted them to do that because I need them to get rid of that card so that that's not coming down later. I want them to pay as much Dawn as possible to build out their board. If they have another Holly, whatever, but I'm just going to make them interact. So this Sanji blocker is going to cost 1 more Dawn than the Holly did, and that's going to be really crucial there. This is how you get rid of resources from the yellow player. And NL, Katakuri, whatever, both of these matchups, they generally play relatively aggressively in the early, depending on how they build. So they're just kind of separating their Dawn here. They're attaching their Dawn early, which is definitely going to work in our favor based on how our triggers are going to line up here, right? So you're going to notice, as I was mentioning, the Nojiko's in my hand. I could have countered out the 5k attack with that, but I'm not. Now I have the Gavel trigger. They're going to swing with that 4k. I'm going to trigger it, and I'm going to bounce the Holly back to their hand. Because they attach their Dawn to that Holly there, that Dawn's now gone. So that's going to be gone there. They can't use that Dawn anymore, and that's going to be why I have that kind of advantage there. So then the NL is going to swing in. I'm going to use 1 Dawn and then Gavel there. And this is ultimately why, I was like, okay, it doesn't really matter if I let them use that Dawn again and pretend like, they could have used it. They can attach an attack. It's just, I'm being kind of disingenuous. I can kind of counter it out anyway. Now, 2 Dawn there, pay that. And I'm thinking like, okay, I have the Nojiko. I can start getting some bounces in. I'm going to get some attacks in first. So firstly, I'm going to get my swing in there, and they're going to counter out that way. Perfect. And now this is where that Nojiko is really going to come into play. Now, I'm going to move my cards around. Top loaders being a lot. I'm going to Buggy first just to see if I can find myself a Deathwink or just something to work with. Unfortunately, it has to be the Impel down. And this is kind of why the Buggy searchers these days, I'm thinking in OP07 we switch into another thing, but Buggy's time in this deck might be a little short. We'll see. But now Nojiko's going to come in. It's going to bounce the blocker, and that's what's going to be key here. This is going to be the big moment that really affects this game. And my Zeff's going to swing into lead. They're going to take the hit, and we're going to resolve the hit first here. And they're thinking like this is actually fantastic for me. So that card's ability makes it so one of my characters can't attack, and the 2 characters that will make a difference have already attacked. So they're just like, okay, whatever. Like something can't attack. It doesn't really matter here. So they're going to use that trigger. They're going to put it back into their hand, and then I'm going to mill 7 cards, which is pretty much going to be the decider here. That's going to be the way that I win this game. I'm going to pass the turn from there with a Spada into a Deathwing and 2 cards on their board, almost like 3-4 cards in hand at their point. And I mean, I feel bad at this point. I'm kind of just taking advantage of my opponent's lack of knowledge here, and they play the Yamato, they add themselves a life, which is fine, and then they pitch away the Zeff, which is going to be really good there. So that's going to be good for them to stop there. Camera's shaking a little bit there. They're going to swing in 5k. I'm going to Spada and then kind of rearrange the top 3. And I'm thinking, I'm like, do I want this? I think I generally do here, especially with the Kaya allowing me to like filter. So I'm going to leave it back on top. Then they're going to swing leader at me, and then I'm then going to use 2. I'm going to play the mellow, and then I'm just explaining them because, my cards are low. I draw myself out a card there. Then I'm going to untap to 10 Dawn in total. Spend the first Dawn here. I keep moving my leader around. Top loaders are a lot. I'm going to Buggy first because I'm like, okay, maybe I do want that Mr. 1, and then I can filter to the bottom, but I find myself a Deathwing. So I'm like, all right, put that down there. Deathwing, and then I'm going to then play the Kaya, drop the Buggy that I just played, and I'm going to draw 2, discard 2. And I'm trying to say, like, okay, the Buggies are a little confusing, but I'm going to essentially destroy the Buggy that can't attack this turn in case I need that. So draw 2, discard 2. I find myself a Arabic Brickfist as well. I could use that to bounce the Ohm, but I don't really want to do that. I can bounce the Kaya. I don't really want to do that either. My hand is, honestly, it's a little awkward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing 5k at that and just spread my resources out. And that's why I was like, okay, I'm going to discard the Buggy that can't attack. So at this point, I'm going to have exactly enough Dawn to really like make this work here. So I'm going to swing 5k at the Ohm, and then I'm going to attach 1 Dawn with the Nami, and then swing kind of 6k at the Ohm now. And then now I have exactly 4 Dawn to Gavel, or not Gavel, sorry, Rubber Band and Deathwing, and then take it from there. This is just one of those things where just matchup knowledge can really make this a little tough. But honestly, I think they're playing this like relatively well. They may not know completely what's going on here, and then they're gonna play the Katakuri here at 8 cost. We were ultimately kind of going back and forth. They're like, well, it says up to 1 character, because they're like, they don't really want to add anything to the top of my life. They want to keep my life like relatively low. I don't have like a Zeff or anything that really is problematic. I already have 3 Kayas out, and we're like, well, as long as it says up to, you should just be able to pick 0. So, you feel, if you want to ask someone about an opinion, that's perfectly fine. I don't mind outside knowledge here just to help this new player. And ultimately, they're like, you know what, we're just going to pick 0. That kind of makes sense. And, kind of keeping my life total relatively low. And we're like, yeah, that's generally what's going to happen there. So at this point, Rubber Band, Deathwing, that's how we're going to move through this deck. As you're looking at my deck here, you're going to notice it's still low. It is really low. We're going to be able to find ourselves a win relatively quick. And it's really got to be like this turn. They're honestly just going to be able to use a bunch of Dawn and counter out next turn. So I'm just going to spin my wheels here. I'm going to play the Rubber Band, mill over a card, and then just take the hit. And this is where I'm like, okay, Deathwing in trigger. Do I bounce the Kaya or not? Because I can't bounce anything on their board. Or do I save it as a potential big counter because the Kaya might whiff, right? I just need to not draw an Impel down. That's really all this is. Most of the cards that I can draw are going to be really good. So I'm going to draw 1 card here off this Deathwing. And of course, I draw the Impel down. That is literally the nightmare scenario. So that could be a misplay that cost me the game there. That Deathwing trigger could have bounced my own Kaya. And I find myself another Deathwing. So this is where things get really tricky. That Impel down is now dead in my hand. I don't have a way to get rid of it. And that's what I'm thinking. I'm shuffling through my hand. I'm like, how do I get rid of this? I can't really, right? I should have used that Deathwing trigger to bounce my Kaya, but hindsight's obviously 2020 here. I thought I was going to draw into maybe some type of counter, some type of usable card, not literally the worst card in that scenario. In that case, I would have just had to bounce Kaya. I would have been able to get rid of like the other Deathwing in hand, because the other Deathwing in hand could draw into something like a Brickfist, which completely messes me up. If it bounces into a character, that's great because I can just counter out with that. So now it's like, next turn, I know that if I can counter out this attack, I can win. That's what I'm thinking right now. And again, this is where maybe like player knowledge for them like is going to make this a little difficult for them. Instead of building out that board, they probably should have just attacked a little bigger and just gone that way, maybe to confirm some hits. But I don't know. I play on Nami's axis, so I'm not going to pretend like I know what they should have done perfectly. So I'm just counting out the amount of cards left I have in deck and just figuring out how I want to do this. So Gavel into my hand is Perfect. And you're going to see something a little tricky that I do here. So take this in. So I'm going to gavel, right? I'm going to mill 2 cards, right? And you're going to see how I handle this Deathwing. I'm going to Deathwing to draw a card. It's going to be a Zeff. You're going to see what I do on this turn just to maximize the amount of cards that I draw here. So what I'm going to do, firstly, just counting through my deck, I have to maximize the amount of cards that I have on my main just to be able to win. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to Deathwing just to draw 1 card. Then I'm going to use the, still in this countering out phase here, I'm going to actually overpay over. I know I already countered it with the Deathwing. I'm going to draw 1 more card with this level up just to be able to get through my deck as much as possible because I have to win on this phase. The Zeff I wanted to save because I'm like, look, the Zeff is going to be able to kind of on play, bounce my characters, bounce the Kaya back to hand, mill 2. And then this kind of confirms the win, which is why ultimately I didn't do anything with the Zeff. I ultimately just played out the Deathwing. And then I was telling them like, hey, this is how I win. They're like, oh, right. And they're like, yeah, I pretty much would have won next turn. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You would have won next turn, which is why I was making all these weird decisions to try and maximize the amount of cards that I'm drawing. But that's ultimately what you have to do. You have to make weird value choices, overpaying on combat in the late game here just to draw as many cards as possible and just confirm the win that way. Other than that, GG, till next time.